He said I was his backup plan, a placeholder in case nothing better came along. So I smiled, stepped aside, and then became his boss. Now he's on probation, and I signed the paychecks. You won't want to miss this story. But before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a video like this one. I didn't mean to hear it, wasn't even trying to listen, but when you walk into your own living room and hear the man you've loved for 2 years say, "She's my backup plan," the world doesn't pause for you to prepare, it just cracks. He said it so casually, so offhand, laughing over a beer with his friend like I was a contingency folder, a fire escape door he hoped he'd never have to use. Safe, stable, there. Not chosen, just conveniently positioned in case nothing better came along. My ears rang, but I stayed quiet, stepping back like I'd forgotten something in the hallway, like I hadn't just heard the truth naked and unvarnished for the first time. Later, I asked him how he saw us, and he said all the right things. "You're the one. I can see forever with you." But I already knew the lines weren't real. They were a cover, a fallback, a plan B, wrapped in affection because it's easier to use someone when they still believe they're loved. I didn't cry that night, didn't yell, didn't give him the satisfaction of watching me unravel. I just nodded like I was tired, kissed his cheek like I still cared, and left like I'd be back. But the next morning, I was done. And not just with him, with the version of me who waited to be picked, who settled for being enough when someone couldn't find better. That moment, those words, they didn't just end a relationship. They detonated a dormant part of me that had been too afraid to demand more. I wasn't heartbroken. I was humiliated, yes, but more than anything, I was awake. Because once you hear someone define you as a backup, you either accept the bench or you start training to run the whole damn team. And I had no intention of sitting on the sidelines ever again. I didn't leave in a blaze of screaming or shattered glass. I left with a quiet, unshakable certainty. The kind that doesn't need a grand finale because the show is already over. There was no confrontation, no last-ditch apology, no desperate plea for closure, just a final, almost surgical act of self-preservation. I packed the essentials in silence, laptop, books, the blanket my grandmother crocheted for me, and a toothbrush I wouldn't be leaving behind this time. I left the key on the counter, face down, not to make a point, but because it no longer belonged in my hand. I didn't text him. I didn't write a long message explaining why. I owed him no translation of my worth, no defense of my decision to walk away from being somebody's safety net. I simply blocked him phone, socials, email, the digital purge that felt less like avoidance and more like air returning to my lungs. Not out of spite, not because I wanted him to chase me or notice the silence, but because I needed space where his noise had once lived. And then I got to work, not in the performative, look at me thriving way, but in the quiet, resolute kind. I sat down and wrote a list, not of revenge fantasies or heartbroken diary entries, but of goals I'd postponed while loving a man who saw me as convenient. The MBA I'd considered, the lateral move I'd rejected, the leadership track I never dared apply for, because he used to say things like, "That's a lot to juggle, don't you think?" As if ambition was a burden I couldn't carry. I signed up for a weekend course. I updated my resume. I scheduled coffee with my old mentor. And I didn't tell a soul, not because I was hiding, but because this transformation wasn't for anyone's validation. It was for me. There's a power in walking away without slamming the door. In letting someone wonder, not because you're playing games, but because you've stopped explaining yourself to people who never truly saw you. That's what this was. Not rage, not revenge. Just clarity, the kind that cuts cleaner than anger ever could. Work became the place where I could finally breathe, not because it was easy, but because it demanded something from me that felt worthy of giving. The betrayal didn't break me. It rerouted me, like a train switching tracks in the middle of the night without warning, but somehow arriving exactly where it needed to be. I buried myself in tasks, projects, meetings, anything that gave structure to the mess inside me. I stayed late, came in early, not because I had to, but because I was done shrinking myself to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. I started a certification course on weekends, something I'd been putting off for years because he used to say things like, "Don't burn yourself out," when what he really meant was, "Don't outgrow me. And without that voice dragging behind me like a sandbag, I moved faster, sharper. I volunteered for strategy roles, led team calls, even pitched a bold restructuring idea in a meeting where I was the only woman under 40 and I didn't flinch. People started noticing, but I wasn't doing it to be noticed. I was doing it because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for permission to be excellent. My manager took me out for coffee and said, "I always knew you had this in you." I smiled, but the truth was, I always knew I'd just been too busy explaining my dreams to someone who couldn't see past his own insecurities. The more I built, the lighter I felt. Like I was slowly unzipping a version of myself that had been stitched together for someone else's benefit. There's a kind of ambition born not from greed, but from reclamation, reclaiming time, dignity, agency. I didn't want power to be impressive. I wanted it so I'd never again have to ask someone to value me, so I could build a world where I set the standard. And slowly, piece by piece, I did. It was supposed to be just another routine afternoon, an HR sync, a quiet desk, a stack of applicant files with coffee cooling by my elbow, but then I saw it. His name. Bold, centered, confident, printed at the top of a resume like it didn't once belong to someone who casually labeled me a backup plan. I froze for a moment, not out of hurt those wounds had scabbed over months ago, but out of something sharper, more surgical, irony, maybe, or divine comedy. He had no idea. No idea that the role he was applying for reported directly to me, that the department he was eager to bring fresh vision to was the one I'd single-handedly reshaped after climbing out of the rubble he left me in. I stared at the resume longer than I should have, like reading the credits of a movie I already knew the ending to. It wasn't bad he hadn't wasted the time since we split, but it was full of half-truths and buzzwords, and the language was unmistakably his, vague confidence hiding under polished mediocrity. I imagined him, suit pressed, voice rehearsed, never once considering that the person on the other end of this application might be someone he once dismissed as safe, supportive, and entirely optional. The audacity would have made me laugh if it weren't so perfectly poetic. I didn't react, not outwardly. I marked the file, further review, slid it into the middle of the stack, and carried on with the meeting. But inside, something shifted. The universe had spun the wheel back to me. The man who couldn't see my worth unless it was attached to his convenience was now unknowingly asking me for a job. And what he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that I was no longer someone who waited to be chosen. I was the choice, the gate, the final word. And whether or not I let him through wouldn't be driven by vengeance or ego, it would be a decision rooted in the new me, the one he never saw coming. I scheduled the interview without hesitation. No red ink, no snide comments, just a polite confirmation sent from my assistant's inbox, the same one all candidates received. My name, hidden beneath a layer of departmental hierarchy, sat in the CC line like a quiet witness to what was coming. The morning of, I wore my confidence like a tailored blazer, subtle but unmistakably fitted. I took my seat in the boardroom we used for leadership interviews, the one with the glass walls that made everything feel more exposed, more honest, even when it wasn't. He walked in 5 minutes early, like he was taught to, with a practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. For a second, he looked past me, scanning for the real decision-maker, and then he froze. It was a slow recognition, like watching someone realize too late they've stepped into the deep end without knowing how to swim. His mouth opened slightly, then shut again, his hand hovering in the air in a half-formed wave. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a smirk or a raised brow. I gestured calmly to the seat across from me, all business. Thanks for coming in. My voice was steady, unrehearsed, the same voice he used to call soft when I disagreed with him, now echoing across a conference room that answered to me. He sat down slowly, like the chair might give way beneath him. He cleared his throat, tried to recover. Wasn't expecting to see you here, but the charm cracked around the edges like cheap veneer. I nodded. Let's get started. And just like that, I took back the narrative. He stammered through rehearsed answers, pitched team strategies like he was still an undergrad. And the more he spoke, the more I realized how little had changed. He still relied on charisma to cover the gaps, still assumed the room would bend around him. But this time, I didn't bend. I asked the tough questions. I let silence stretch when his answers fumbled. I watched him sweat in a room he once would have thought he owned. And in that hour, I didn't need revenge. I had position, I had peace. And that was louder than anything I could have said. I offered him the job with the same tone I'd use to order toner or approve a travel budget, calm, measured, completely unaffected. It wasn't about pettiness or revenge, though I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a certain chill of satisfaction in watching him try to interpret my every blink. I chose him because, on paper, he was qualified. On performance, he was adequate. And deep down, I knew the real victory wasn't denying him a seat, it was letting him take one under me. HR handled the offer letter and onboarding, all by the book, while I remained the portrait of neutrality. I didn't smile when they told me he accepted, but I didn't flinch either. His signature landed on my desk, inked next to company letterhead, beneath my department's banner, under an approval hierarchy where I now sat at the top. I stapled the papers and placed them in the new hire folder like it was any other Tuesday. The real power wasn't in the hiring, it was in being unreadable. He didn't know what I was thinking. Didn't know if I'd forgiven, forgotten, or was simply indifferent. That was the art of it. No drama, no long glares across the hallway, no whispered warnings to the team, just silence. Strategic, undeniable silence. I walked past him on his first day without so much as a glance. Watched him introduce himself to staff I'd personally mentored, saw him rehearse his role as the charming new guy while every protocol, every KPI, every quarterly target he'd soon be evaluated against had been designed by me. He was stepping onto a field I had landscaped, painted, and gated. I didn't need to say, "Welcome to my world." He was already standing in it, and every smile he offered, every handshake he extended, was now under the scrutiny of the woman he once saw as his safety net. I didn't win by punishing him, I won by becoming someone he couldn't touch. Someone who could smile without revealing a single intention. Because the truth is, control doesn't shout. It signs the papers, closes the folder, and moves on without blinking. He walked into the office like it owed him something swagger wrapped in entitlement, like the job was a formality and excellence optional. I watched him breeze through orientation, making friends with surface-level charm and overcompensating with buzzwords he barely understood. The real work came, and predictably, the cracks showed. Missed deadlines dressed up with excuses, half-finished briefs sent hours past due, a presentation where he used one of my old strategies, poorly paraphrased, thinking no one would notice. But I noticed everything. I didn't reprimand, didn't warn, I documented. Every slip, every delay, every error he tried to smother beneath his fake charm. I built a quiet record, time-stamped, archived, impartial. I let his own habits write the report card he once thought he was too clever to ever be graded on. He thought he could coast on likability just like he did in relationships, including ours. He hadn't changed. He just had a different arena to disappoint someone in. Only this time, the someone he underestimated was the person reading every excuse and measuring every outcome against team performance. It was surreal, in a way, watching him unravel not because I was pushing him, but because he'd never learned to stand up without leaning on someone else. He tried to joke with me in the kitchen once, the same casual, condescending tone he used to use when I got excited about a new role or idea back when we were together. I stirred my tea, gave him a polite smile, and walked away. No explanation, no reaction. He tried harder after that. More small talk, louder presence in meetings, little performances designed to remind me he still thought he mattered. But all I saw was a man fumbling to reclaim relevance in a space he never earned. I didn't need to say anything. I'd already said it all by building the kind of team that ran smoothly without him. Every delay from him now stood in contrast to the rhythm around him, his missteps echoing louder with each passing day. And quietly, as his confidence began to fold under the weight of expectation, I realized I didn't need revenge. I needed receipts, and I was collecting them daily. He walked into the review room like it was just another box to check, a casual step in some game he thought he still knew how to play. I'd seen that look before, back when he thought he could coast through a relationship with smooth words and shallow promises, assuming I'd always be there to soften the edges. But this wasn't love. This was performance, metrics, proof, and I didn't bring feelings to the table, I brought data. I opened the file calmly, page by page, like unfolding a quiet reckoning. There were numbers missed targets, delayed deliverables, project timelines dragged down by his inefficiency. Then the timestamps emails unanswered, Slack messages left hanging, feedback loops closed without him. I had a full record, not out of spite, but because I don't run teams on hunches or vibes. I run them on facts. He sat across from me, a slight smirk at first, which cracked the moment I read the first performance metric aloud. By the time I reached the third chart, his posture had shifted, shoulders tight, hands clasped. I didn't raise my voice, didn't insert opinion. I asked questions. Can you walk me through why this deadline was missed? Silence. Can you explain why your department lagged 12% behind the benchmark last month? More silence. It wasn't about humiliating him. It was about holding him to the same standard he once thought I couldn't live up to. He had no answers, just flashes of embarrassment disguised as frustration. He tried to pivot, of course blamed miscommunication, asked if someone else dropped the ball. But the audit trail was clean, and I let the silence do the work. He stared down at the table when I mentioned the client complaint. I never escalated one. I could have used to end him weeks ago, but didn't. Because this wasn't about ending him. It was about showing him, calmly, professionally, undeniably, that the backup plan he once dismissed now had the authority to determine his future. I handed him a written summary of the evaluation, invited him to respond in writing within 48 hours, and thanked him for his time. I stood. He didn't. Not right away. I think part of him was still trying to locate the version of me he thought I'd be. But she left the room long before he ever entered. What remained was the boss, and the boss doesn't flinch. He sat across from me, lips tight, jaw clenched, doing his best to keep the tremor in his voice from surfacing. HR was in the room, neutral, unreadable, just as they're trained to be. I didn't look at him with vengeance. I didn't need to. My power wasn't in my tone, but in the weight of the folder I placed between us. Performance probation, I said, sliding the document forward like a quiet gavel dropping. There was no room for misinterpretation, just metrics, timelines, and expectations he hadn't come close to meeting. He glanced at the paper like it was in another language, but I knew he could read every word. The man who once told a friend I wasn't main character material was now reading the script I'd written, with him playing the understudy to a role he never deserved. His signature would seal it, not an ending, but a reckoning. I made no mention of the past, no nod to the irony, though it screamed in the silence between us. This wasn't a romantic subplot anymore. This was business, me leading, him stumbling behind. HR walked him through the process coaching period. Weekly check-ins, clear benchmarks. I watched him shrink with each bullet point. His pride couldn't save him now, not in a space where results, not charm, held currency. I almost pitied him for a flicker of a second. Not because he didn't see this coming, but because even now, he didn't understand why it was happening. He still thought he'd just run out of luck, not that his arrogance had finally caught up to him. I remembered the version of me who would have second-guessed this, worried about being too harsh, too emotional. She used to rewrite her own thoughts before speaking, always softening the truth to be digestible. That version would have apologized while handing out discipline, but that version doesn't sit in this chair. I leaned back, composed, and told him I expected to see measurable change within the month, or his probation would escalate to termination. I thanked him for his time. He left the room slower than he entered, posture lower, no eye contact. HR said nothing, just noted the outcome and left. I stared at the door long after it clicked shut. Not because I doubted the decision, but because I knew somewhere, in his unraveling, he realized he'd just become the side character in a story I was finally writing for myself. The whispers came like smoke, thick, curling, impossible to contain once they started rising. I never confirmed anything, never so much as hinted, but offices thrive on unfinished stories, and mine was now the favorite fable at the water cooler. They pieced it together in fragments. The new guy who used to date the boss, the tension in the air during team meetings, the paper trail too clean to be coincidence. I walked through it all with my head high, calm, deliberate, unbothered. The same people who once smiled at him a little too easily now avoided eye contact when they passed him in the hallway. And every time I heard my name spoken just a little too quietly, I knew it was never doubt, only awe. Maybe fear, maybe admiration in disguise. I didn't correct the narrative. I didn't deny it, either. Let them guess. Let them sit with the image of a woman scorned, turning strategy into consequence. There was a strange, charged silence around me now, not isolation, but reverence, the kind given to people who've done what others only fantasize about in the privacy of their pain. I showed up early, delivered ahead of schedule, led without raising my voice. My performance reviews became bulletproof. My name floated in rooms I hadn't even stepped into. And then came the promotion again. No fanfare, just a formal email and a meeting invite. Director. A new title, a bigger office, a higher vantage point. I read the announcement while sipping tea, not flinching when the congratulatory emails rolled in, even from people who once overlooked me, dismissed me, treated me as a backup plan just like he did. The timing wasn't lost on anyone. A woman rising while the man who thought he'd never need her stumbled below. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The elevation spoke for itself. I moved through the halls like a quiet storm collected, precise, gracious to those who deserved it, immovable to those who didn't. Every step up the ladder now came with fewer apologies, fewer explanations. Just results, just presence. And as the murmurs twisted into myth and the myth cemented into legend, I let it be. I had no desire to rewrite the gossip or correct the poetry others were stitching from my silence. Let them call it revenge. Let them call it power. I called it progress, and I made sure he watched every inch of it from below. The email came at 11:42 p.m., the kind of hour where desperation masquerades as clarity. His name lit up my screen like a ghost dragging its chains, rattling for attention. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit there, pulsing. I already knew what it would say, some cobbled-together reflection he mistook for growth, some soft-spoken rewrite of the past where he was misunderstood, unsure, still figuring it out. When I finally clicked it open, the words barely registered. I've changed. I'm proud of you. You always were something special. As if that erased the years of being an afterthought. As if pride now carried more weight than the condescension I once swallowed just to feel seen. I stared at the screen, unreadable, unmoved. There was no satisfaction in his apology, no thrill in his regret. Just proof that he was still who he always was, a man who reached out only when the world stopped revolving around him. The irony? I didn't feel angry. I felt nothing. That was the win. Not the power shift, not the title, not the office I'd already earned those. The real triumph was the stillness in my chest, the way his name no longer stirred anything but a dull, distant memory of someone I once tried to build a future around. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because the story was over. I had rewritten my narrative without him. I didn't need closure from someone who never offered clarity when it mattered. Let him sit with the silence. Let him imagine the version of me that still needed his words to feel whole. She's long gone, replaced by someone who no longer clings to half-love, to breadcrumbs of recognition. He might wait days, weeks, forever, but there would be no reply. I archived the email without hesitation. Not deleted, just stored away like an old document you don't need but keep as evidence. Let him be haunted by the lack of response, by the vacuum where my forgiveness used to live. I wasn't his redemption arc. I was his wake-up call. And I wouldn't be the one to walk him through the apology he should have found on his own. He's still looking for someone to rescue him from his reflection. But I don't carry lifeboats anymore. I build ships and I sail them without passengers who doubted I'd ever leave the shore. She walked in on her first day with a notebook too big for her bag and eyes that flicked nervously between names on cubicles, like she was scanning for safety. I knew that look. Knew that hunger tucked beneath the politeness. The same kind I wore like armor years ago when I sat in rooms too sharp, too cold, too silent. Her name was Kira, and in the first week, she stayed late without being asked, took notes like she was trying to memorize the building's heartbeat, and apologized too much just like I used to. I didn't hover, but I made space. Space for her to ask without fear, to contribute without being interrupted, to try without bracing for a slap disguised as feedback. I introduced her in meetings with intention, gave her credit out loud, let her speak first. the way no one ever did for me. She lit up like a match every time I did. It wasn't charity. It was survival passed down like a blueprint. Watching her grow sharper, more certain, more brave, felt like rewinding my own story and rewriting it in real time. She didn't need saving. She just needed a ladder that wasn't being yanked away the moment she reached for it. One afternoon, she stayed back, hesitant, shifting weight between her heels. She asked, "How did you get here?" The question was innocent, but it hit like an echo. I didn't give her the whole story, not the heartbreak, not the quiet war, not the revenge stitched into my spine, but I told her this: I stopped waiting to be chosen. I chose myself. She didn't write that down, but I saw her mouth repeat it later when she thought no one was looking. That's the thing about mentorship. It's not about creating versions of yourself. It's about clearing the brambles so they don't bleed like you did. I watched her pitch her first idea in a room full of men twice her age. She didn't flinch, didn't shrink. When she finished, they nodded, not out of politeness but respect. And I felt it, not pride, exactly. Something deeper. Something that said, the cycle just cracked. Somewhere along the way, supporting her became a mirror, reflecting back the strength I once thought I had to earn through pain. She'll never have to be someone's backup plan, not on my watch. That's the real promotion the one no org chart tracks. It was a Tuesday gray, forgettable, until his name lit up my inbox again. Another slip, another deadline ignored, another client question he couldn't answer because he hadn't even read the brief. There wasn't even malice in it, just the same lazy entitlement that used to make me second-guess myself when I cooked dinner while he scrolled TikTok and called it winding down. This time, it wasn't my pride on the line. It was my department, my team, my name on the dotted line. I opened the file. The timestamps didn't lie. The client had followed up twice. He hadn't responded once. I didn't rage. I didn't rant. I just felt this deep, still click in my chest, like the sound a lock makes right before the door finally opens. I didn't even pause to sip my coffee. I just typed it out, simple and clean. Repeated violation, recommend termination. I reread it once. It didn't feel petty. It felt like the exact weight of the consequences he'd never thought he'd face. I hit send. HR responded within the hour. Formal procedures. Final meeting. I watched the calendar update with the slot, felt the familiar chill of endings rising, but this time, I wasn't the one being left behind. I was the one drawing the line. The irony didn't escape me. He once said I was safe, a placeholder, his backup plan. Now he was the liability. I walked past his desk that afternoon. He wasn't there, out sick again, or maybe just hiding from the standards he'd never learned to meet. I didn't flinch, just walked on. The power wasn't in punishing him. It was in how little space he took up in my head now. No more wondering why I wasn't enough. No more replaying conversations in the shower. Just silence. Earned. Clean. When the HR rep asked if I wanted to be present for the exit meeting, I declined. I had meetings to lead, budgets to review, and a promising intern prepping her first client pitch. His chapter was closed. No applause, no vengeance speech, just a locked door he would never be allowed to reopen. Somewhere, he might still be telling people I was too cold, too ambitious, too much. But I don't hear it anymore. I'm not the girl waiting for recognition. I'm the woman who writes the reports, signs the forms, and ends the stories that don't deserve another page. He left the way he came in, quietly, head down, pretending not to feel the sting of consequence, like it was just another Tuesday and not the last page of a book he never realized someone else had started writing. I didn't look up when he passed by the glass wall of the conference room. I was already in the middle of a quarterly budget review, speaking with clarity and confidence about expansion initiatives, staff training improvements, and onboarding structures, everything he never bothered to learn because he thought charm outranked competence. He wasn't even a shadow at that point. Just a name on a clearance badge HR would deactivate by noon. They say revenge is loud, dramatic, a dish best served cold. But this wasn't revenge, it was correction. Course correction. Like fixing a number in a spreadsheet and watching the forecast finally make sense. I didn't announce anything. No triumphant smirk, no snide remarks to my team, just a calm continuation of the life I had built while he was busy underestimating me. The silence in the room wasn't awkward. It was professional, focused, affirming, because everyone already knew. His failure wasn't a spectacle, it was expected. The moment I stopped accepting less, the clock had started ticking on his relevance. He had walked into a future I no longer occupied, thinking I'd still be there waiting. But by the time he realized the difference between a backup plan and a blueprint, I was already rebuilding higher. There was something beautiful about not having to look at him, about knowing I could, but choosing the spreadsheet instead, choosing the next step, choosing myself. When the assistant placed a fresh printout beside me, she didn't ask about him. She just pointed to the growth projections and said, "We're going to need more space soon." And I smiled, finally. Not at his absence, but at the fullness of the room he never thought I'd own. The coffee on the table was still hot, but his presence had cooled long before. No aftershocks, no closure talk, just forward motion. By the end of the meeting, we were discussing team retreats and office upgrades. His name never came up. It didn't have to. Because when you stop chasing people who never plan to catch you, you don't just find peace, you find progress. And I wasn't going back for a single unfinished sentence. The office felt different that morning, quieter, lighter, like the building itself had exhaled something it didn't know it was holding. I passed his old desk without flinching. It was already cleared, a hollow shell of paper clips and missed chances, and I didn't need to slow down to remember what it used to mean. I used to glance at that desk and feel everything hurt, humiliation, the sharp sting of being seen as an afterthought. But not today. Today, my heels echoed in the hallway like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence only I could write. When I reached my office, the sun caught the glass just right, and for a second, it felt like the universe wanted me to notice the nameplate. My name first, middle, last etched in clean, confident letters. Not a plaque slid into a slot, not a laminated sticker. Etched, permanent, mine. No asterisk, no assistant to, no shared space, just me. And it wasn't about revenge anymore, it hadn't been for a while. It was about arrival. About walking into a space that used to feel too big and realizing it fit because I grew into it. I opened the door with the same hand that once trembled after a breakup text. The same hand that once scribbled goals on sticky notes in a studio apartment while wondering if I'd ever be taken seriously. That hand now gripped a strategy folder, a hiring proposal, and the future of a team that looked to me not because of a title, but because of how I led them through fire without burning out. I closed the door behind me not to keep the world out, but to finally sit inside something I built from scratch. There was no victory lap. Just a quiet moment, me at my desk, coffee steaming, calendar full, heart steady. The desk once shared in whispers was now a ghost. Mine stood firm beneath a framed degree, a photo of my mentor, and a brass pen that signed the paperwork that sealed his fate. And as I typed the agenda for our expansion meeting, a small voice in my head whispered, "Never a backup again. Not in life, not in love, and certainly not in leadership." I smiled. Not because he was gone, but because I was finally, fully here. And for the first time, the name on the door wasn't just a title, it was a testament,